Top 10 Unsolved Mysterious Cases, Part 2. Number 10. The Gardner Museum Heist. On March 18, 1990, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston fell victim to one of the greatest art thefts in history. Only 13 pieces of art were stolen, but the combined value of all those paintings was worth over $500 million. On the night of the heist, 2 inexperienced guards were on duty. One of them was named Richard E. Abath, who was a music school dropout and part of a rock band. By his own admission, he confessed that he would come to work drunk or stoned after a performance. Though, he insists he was sober the night of the robbery. At 12:54 a.m., a fire alarm went off on the 3rd floor of the museum. When Abath went to go investigate, there was no fire. Whether this was part of the thieves' scheme is unknown. At 1:24 a.m., 2 men dressed as Boston police buzzed the security desk where Abath was stationed. The men said that they were responding to a disturbance call and demanded entry. St. Patrick's Day parties were happening around the city, so the disturbance call made sense to Abath. The guard buzzed the men into the employee entrance, which violated museum protocol. Then, when the men reached Abath behind the desk, one of them said, "You look familiar. I think we have a default warrant out for you. Come out here and show us some identification." Abath was tricked to leave his control desk that had the only button that would trigger a silent alarm. He was then instructed to face the wall and was handcuffed. The second guard then appeared and he was also arrested. When the second guard asked why he was being arrested, one of the men replied, "You're not being arrested. This is a robbery. Don't give us any problems and you won't get hurt." 81 minutes later, the thieves made out with 13 timeless works of art. Number 9. The Keddie Cabin Murders. On April 12, 1981, in Keddie, California, the Sharp family and some friends went to sleep inside cabin 28 at the Keddie Resort Lodge. Sheila Sharp would wake up to find her mother, Sue, her brother, Johnny, and their family friend Dana Wingate brutally murdered inside the cabin, while her 12-year-old sister, Tina, was missing from the scene. Sheila only escaped the murders by sleeping at a friend's cabin next door. Surprisingly, they found Sheila's 2 younger brothers, Greg and Rick, and their friend Justin Smart, asleep in another bedroom inside cabin 28 and safe. Tina's remains would be found by an anonymous tip on the 3rd anniversary of the murders. Her skull was found 50 miles away from Keddie in a different county. There were only 2 suspects that the police examined, Marty Smart and his roommate, Bo Bubaid. Marty Smart was married to Marilyn Smart and they were parents to Justin Smart. Marty was apparently an abusive husband. Since Sheila Sharp had just escaped an abusive relationship herself, there were reports that she was giving Marilyn some counseling. When Marty found out that Sheila was interfering in his marriage, he reportedly went ballistic. Soon after the murders, Marty left Keddie for Reno, Nevada. Law enforcement felt that the murders took more than one person to conduct, which is why they took Bo Bubaid into questioning as an accomplice. Bo Bubaid was also an ex-con. Despite there being so much more to the case, the investigation oddly stopped there. There was evidence that seemingly went unnoticed and people of interest that were not examined properly. The murderer of the Keddie crime has not been identified and the case remains unsolved. Number 8. The mysterious drowning of Natalie Wood. On November 29, 1981, around 7:30 a.m., actress Natalie Wood's body was found floating face down in the Pacific Ocean about 200 yards away from Catalina Island's Blue Cavern Point. She was wearing only a flannel nightgown, blue wool socks, and a red down jacket. Natalie Wood was one of Hollywood's biggest stars up until the time of her death, with roles that included Miracle on 34th Street and West Side Story. Eerily, Natalie Wood's mother had given the fear of dark water to her daughter because a fortune teller had prophesied that she would die of drowning. As a child, it was reported that her fear of water was so great she was even afraid to wash her hair, and recurring nightmares about drowning. Everyone on the boat, including the captain, had been drinking for much of the weekend. On that Friday night, Wood and Wagner had argued to the point where Davern became concerned and asked Walken to get involved. Walken refused to intervene and is quoted saying, "Never get involved in an argument between a man and his wife." Davern ended up taking Wood to shore that night using the ship's dinghy, the Prince Valiant, and they slept at a hotel in Avalon. The next morning, they returned to the yacht and Wood agreed to spend the rest of the weekend on board. Witnesses from a nearby boat claimed they heard shouts around midnight. However, there was a party going on nearby, so they thought it was from the party and didn't intervene. One of the witnesses, John Payne, said he heard a woman scream, "Help me! Someone help me," coming from the stern of the Splendor and potentially from a dinghy. He then thought he heard a man's voice say, "Okay honey, we'll get you," but the tone was so mocking, which is why he thought the cries were associated with the party. To this day, her death remains a mystery. Number 7. The death of the boy in the box. On February 25, 1957, a body of an unidentified boy was found in a box in an illegal dumping ground near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The boy was estimated to be around 4 to 6 years old, weighed about 30 pounds, and stood around 3 feet 3 inches. He was found naked but wrapped in a blanket. His hair was recently cut and his body was recently washed clean. There were small scars on his chin, groin, and left ankle, some of which proved he went through a small medical procedure. He was found with blunt force trauma to the head that was determined to be the cause of death, and there were no witnesses. The body was found by a young man who was walking through the abandoned lot. Strangely, the man waited a whole day before contacting the police, and even a second man had previously found the boy's body but had not contacted the police because he didn't want to get involved. With the cold weather and delayed phone call, police weren't able to accurately estimate the time of the boy's death. In order to identify the boy, the body was kept in the morgue while visitors from 10 different states tried to look for identifiable marks to no avail. Police sent out 400,000 flyers of the boy to police stations, post offices, and courthouses all over the country. Even the American Medical Association sent out a description of the boy, but it led nowhere. The police compared the boy's footprints to hospitals in the area and even took fingerprints, but no records showed that the boy ever existed. In 2016, the National Center for Missing Exploited Children released a forensic facial reconstruction of the victim and added him into their database. Unfortunately, the boy has never been identified and the case still remains open. Number 6. The Axemen of New Orleans. Starting in 1918 and over a period of 18 months, the city of New Orleans was haunted by a serial killer known as the Axeman. The Axeman was the personification of the bogeyman, only attacking at night, and was rumored to be responsible for 12 attacks and 6 deaths. To make this mystery even more chilling, he seemed to only creep on his victims while they slept. Oddly enough, the Axeman never used his own tools and only used what he could find in the victim's house. Usually an axe, which he then would leave at the scene of the crime. The majority of the Axeman's victims were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans, leading many citizens of New Orleans to believe that the crimes were ethnically motivated. Many media outlets drew frenzy from this aspect of the crimes, even suggesting mafia involvement despite the pure lack of evidence. Other crime analysts have suggested that the Axeman killings were related to sex and that the murderer was perhaps a sadist specifically seeking female victims. Other theories include that the Axeman killed male victims only when they blocked his attempts to murder women, supported by cases in which the woman of a household was murdered but not the man. A less likely theory is that the serial killer committed the murders in an attempt to promote jazz music, suggested by a letter that the murderer himself was rumored to write, which stated that he would spare the lives of those who played jazz in their homes. The Axeman was never identified, and the murders remain unsolved. Number 5. The Sodder children disappearance. On the night before Christmas in 1945 in Fayetteville, West Virginia, George and Jenny Sodder were asleep with 9 of their children when a fire started in the house around 1 o'clock in the morning. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children managed to escape. The remaining 5 children remained in the house. Between the 5 of them, they shared 2 bedrooms located upstairs. George broke back into the house to save the rest of the children, but the staircase was on fire. When he went outside to retrieve his ladder, it was missing from its normal spot. Plus, both of his coal trucks, which he was going to use to stand on top of, were strangely not starting. Marion, one of the children who escaped the fire, ran to a neighbor's house to phone the fire department, but the operator didn't pick up. When another neighbor called, the operator failed to pick up the phone again. That same neighbor actually drove to town and found the fire chief in person bodies, including their bones. While that theory sounds reasonable, it's not entirely accurate because even when flesh is burned away, bones are typically living. F.J. Morris and told him about the fire. However, even though the fire station was located a mere 2.5 miles away from the house, the firefighters didn't reach the Sodder home until 8 a.m., 7 hours after the fire began. When they got there, the house was literally burnt to ash. Authorities sifted through the ash to try and find the remains of the missing 5 children, but nothing was found and they were presumed dead due to the fire. Morris suggested that the fire was so hot that it literally cremated the children's left behind. The cause of the fire was deemed to be bad wiring and the 5 missing children were issued death certificates. Soon after the fire, George and Jenny began to suspect that their children were not dead but instead kidnapped, and the fire was deliberately set as a diversion. To this day, they have never been found. Number 4. The mystery of the Circleville letters. In 1976, residents of Circleville, Ohio, began receiving threatening mail that has haunted ever since. The letters were from Columbus but had no return address. They accused school bus driver, Mary Gillespie, and the school superintendent of having an extramarital affair. One of the letters was even addressed to Mary's husband Ron that threatened his life if he didn't put a stop to the affair. In 1977, Ron died in a suspicious one-car crash that involved gunshots. However, when the sheriff ruled the death an accident, other residents of Circleville began receiving letters accusing the sheriff of covering up the so-called accident. Ron's sister's husband, Paul Freshour, was convicted of writing the letters after there was an attempt to murder Mary via a booby-trap-rigged pistol. Even after he was thrown behind bars, the Circleville letters continued throughout the 1970s and the early 1980s. Freshour even received one in prison. In 1994, Freshour was released, and he claimed his innocence until his death in 2012. The true identity of the Circleville letter writer remains unknown. Number 3. The Watcher House. In June 2014, Maria and Derek Broaddus and their 3 young children were getting ready to move into their new home, 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey, 30th safest cities in the United States, 3 days after closing the sale. Before the Broaddus family had even begun to move in, a letter arrived in their new mailbox. The letter was addressed to the new owner in big clunky handwriting. The letter mentioned specifics about the Broaddus family. "You have children. I have seen them," the letter continued. "So far I think there are 3 that I have counted. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call them and draw them to me." At the bottom of the letter, the author used a cursive font. They claimed the 6-bedroom house was their dream home and located just a couple of blocks away from Maria's childhood home in one of the top font to sign The Watcher. By the end of 2014, the case had stalled. There was no digital trail and the mental effects were taking a toll on the Broaddus family. There were no fingerprints and no way to place somebody at the scene of the crime. Only 6 months after they received the letters, they decided to sell the home. 657 Boulevard has been sold and is currently off the market while the watcher's identity still remains a mystery. Number 2. The mysterious death of Tupac Shakur. On September 7, 1996, at the MGM Grand Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada, well-known rapper Tupac Shakur was seen attending a Mike Tyson boxing match. After the match, Tupac left with the CEO of Death Row Records, Suge Knight. Upon the departure of the match, Tupac and his bodyguards got into a fight with Compton-based Southside Crips gang member Orlando Anderson in the lobby of the MGM. After the fight was broken up, Tupac and Knight left in Knight's car with Tupac's entourage following in cars behind them. While stopped at the intersection of Flamingo and Koval, a white Cadillac pulled up to the passenger side of Knight's car and shot out of the window, hitting Tupac 4 times and grazing Knight in the head with a bullet fragment. In 2014, retired LVPD Sergeant Chris Carroll revealed that he was the first police officer at the scene. According to Carroll, when he opened the car door, Tupac fell out of the car, covered in blood, and Carroll asked, "Who shot you?" Tupac took a deep breath and only proclaimed explicative words. Has been claimed a suspect and no arrests have been made. Number 1. The ghost ship of the Mary Celeste. On December 4, 1872, a British-American ship called the Mary Celeste was found abandoned and floating in the Atlantic Ocean. It was found to be perfectly seaworthy and with its cargo fully intact, except for a lifeboat, which it appeared had been boarded in an orderly fashion. Words at the police officer before slipping into unconsciousness. Tupac was then taken to UMC and placed on life support and into a medically induced coma. On September 13, 1996, 6 days after the shooting, Tupac died as a result of his injuries at the age of 25. Las Vegas police never arrested anyone in connection with the murder. They also failed to follow up with Yaki Gaddafi, a member of Tupac's entourage who claimed he could identify the assailant. Unfortunately, Gaddafi was murdered only 2 months after the infamous shooting before he could be interviewed. To this day, no one has been claimed a suspect and no arrests have been made. Number 1. The ghost ship of the Mary Celeste. On December 4, 1872, a British-American ship called the Mary Celeste was found abandoned and floating in the Atlantic Ocean. It was found to be perfectly seaworthy and with its cargo fully intact, except for a lifeboat, which it appeared had been boarded in an orderly fashion. But why? We may never know because no one on board was ever heard from again. The Mary Celeste set sail from New York bound for Genoa, Italy in November 1872. The ship was manned by Captain Benjamin Briggs and 7 crew members, including Briggs' wife and their 2-year-old daughter. Supplies on board were set to last for 6 months, and there were luxurious items on board including a sewing machine and an upright piano. Historians and commentators generally agree that to abandon such a worthy ship, some extraordinary and alarming circumstance must have arisen. However, the last entry on the ship's daily log reveals nothing unusual, and inside the ship, all appeared to be in order. Conspiracy theories over the years have included mutiny, pirate attack, and even a giant octopus or sea monster attack. However, the cause behind this ghost ship remains unsolved.